When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Warning, creators of this game do understand the subject matter may be offensive to some, but they do honor the families and people that have been affected by these real-life tragedies that these individuals have caused. Want to play a game?
Oh, yeah!
Lover of true crime?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we got an interesting game for you to check out.
Wow.
With the mashup of influences such as horror movies, collecting cards, and RPGs.
What?
Led to giving birth to an incredible creation of this game, Killers, the card game.
You are all I killed with now.
This game is a collectible trading card game featuring some of the most infamous killers, with tidbits of trivia on the back of each card to help you learn some insight to each criminal.
Who the hell are you?
Let's not forget, during the game, cops will be chasing you and these criminals.
I'm a cop, you idiot!
However, check out their website listed through all social media today, which can be found under Killers, the card game.
Am I on the internet?
I want to play a game.
Hi, everybody. I'm Billy Vera, and you're going to check me out on Crazy Train Radio.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, what a way to start the new year for me. And this happened, I would say, by a happy accident on my end. And I'll explain that in a second. But this next guest is an American singer, songwriter, actor, author, music historian, and just a very well-rounded guy. Most people would know the classic song At This Moment because of family ties if you're of a certain generation. But this guest is Mr. Billy Vera. Good morning. I know you're on the West Coast. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How you doing, man?
Can't complain. And I want to explain what I mean by the happy accident. And you can explain as much or as little as you'd like. So many of our audience members are fans of the Friday the 13th series. And a friend of the show is Melanie Kinnaman. And
who's a dear friend of mine.
yes. So long story short, Melanie was posting about something because she's got something coming up in Atlanta, which I'm working on going to catch up with her at because she's just a doll. And so anyway, in this post, long story short, Mr. Vera commented on that post. And I'm sitting here thinking in my head going, yeah, just as a music guy and historian and everything else like that going, no way. That can't be the Billy Vera because you got a long history of credits from the 60s on and second generation, all that stuff. So sure enough, I click and because I'm nosy. Well, goddamn, that is him. Long story short, reached out and here we are. So first question is, how'd you get connected with Melanie?
Melanie came to a nightclub many years ago I was playing at. I don't remember who. Oh, I think I know. A girlfriend of hers was a comedian who opened up for us. And so she came along with the comedian. And we hit it off, Melanie and I. Yeah.
So it's just, I know the entertainment world is a small circle, but it was like, sometimes I forget how small it is. So it was cool to see you guys connected and that you actually have a friendship. I didn't think that that'd be the path I would take to get here, but here we are. Before I get in all the fun stuff, I do want to mention, because when we started talking about dates and times and all that stuff to do this, you have new music out called Stand By Me. So I want to insert that in here to when we publish the episode. But before we play the song, what can you tell me about the song?
Well, of course, Stand By Me is one of the greatest records ever made, the original version by Benny King, who was a friend of mine and also of Larry Chance of the Earls, who you may, if you're a music historian, you do know who the Earls are.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm a big doo-wop fan. It's where for my age group, but go ahead.
There you go. Well, last June, 2022, I was asked to come back to New York and do a show at my old high school, Archbishop Stepanak in White Plains, New York. And they had me do an interview, radio interview to promote the show about a month ahead of time. And the disc jockey was not that skilled an interviewer, let's say. And I said, my God, this guy is going to MC the show. Oh, this could be drastic because, all my friends from high school days are going to be there and I'll be embarrassed. He'll say something stupid about me. And, so I called up Larry. And I said, Larry, if you're not working that night, could you do me a huge favor and come and just introduce me? He said, of course. So, I'll do that for you. So the night of the show, Larry comes out and he gives me this beautiful flowery introduction and, made it look like I walked on water, and now the great Billy Vera, and so I do my show. And at the end, I bring Larry out on stage and we do an impromptu version of Stand By Me. And we get a standing ovation. So a couple of days later, after I got back to Los Angeles, Larry called me up. He said, I cut a track on Stand By Me a couple of years ago. He said, how would you feel about putting your voice on there with me, because it went over so well at Stepanak. I said, well, Larry, the world doesn't need another Stand By Me. I mean, Benny's record was one of the all-time greats. He said, no, just listen to the track and then decide. So of course I did. And I was incredibly surprised because rather than what most people do, which is just try to copy Benny's arrangement, Larry's version sounded like Count Basie. It was an astounding version, arrangement with big horn band and a great saxophone solo. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I went over to my saxophone player's house and I put my voice on. I I recorded about 3 or 4 takes, and I sent them back to Larry. I said, Larry, use what you want. It's your record. Put me on there where you want me. So he did, and he did a marvelous version of it. And the record came out. Larry put it out. And little did I realize it suddenly starts getting played on all the jazz stations. And then it gets played on all these. You familiar with the Carolina beach music scene?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, all those stations are playing it. And now it's in the top 10 down there. And here we are, I'm 78 and Larry's 82, and a couple of old geezers. We got a record that's people are loving and buying and making some noise. So stranger things have happened, huh?
Exactly. And before I go ahead and insert the song here, thinking about it, and Stand By Me, like you said, is one of those tracks that is so well received and has been duplicated, I guess the best word is, or covered many times over the years and stuff. So obviously you expressed your concerns in terms of, do I really want to add something to this and whatnot to Larry's version of things? And I think of things like, say, On Broadway, Then You Can Tell Me Goodbye. There's certain tracks throughout history that have many covers and stuff. Would the number one question come to you going, what can I add to this? Or was it after you heard it, okay, this is what I can add to this particular version?
Well, once I heard the track, and it was a radically different, it's a total reimagining of the song, which is what a good cover should do. I mean, I remember when Benny's record was out, Cassius Clay did a version. It was just absolutely, it's so bad, it's funny, And
we know he was a great singer, Cassius Clay.
Yeah, the great singer Cassius Clay. This is before he became Muhammad Ali. But so, I didn't want to fall into that category and get lost. Why waste your time? Because a lot of people have recorded my song at this moment, and not always in the best of taste. People tend to, because it's an emotional song, people tend to oversing it, get a little over melodramatic with it. And but when somebody just lets the song do the work for them, that's when they do a good job. Michael Bublé is a good example. He did a very good job of it. Jimmy Fallon actually nailed it pretty well on his show. Didn't record it, but you can see it on YouTube if you want. Rita Coolidge did a nice job of it at this moment. Because she doesn't have the vocal equipment to go overboard, like a lot of singers try to show off how many notes they can sing in one word. And at any rate, I stray from Stand By Me, but yeah, I mean, the arrangement that I heard when Larry sent it, that dictated to me my approach. I'm going to sing it from my soul, from my heart. And I listened to what Larry was doing, and he was singing it from his soul. And since we were of, the same generation, basically, we came up in New York and Bronx, Westchester, Harlem. And so Larry and I had a lot of the same influences. We some of our heroes are the same. For example, we both love Arthur Prysock. Neither of us tries to sing like Arthur Prysock, but who
could though?
Who could? Billy Eckstein,
Oh.
But I love Arthur Prysock, who by the way recorded At This Moment, which was a big thrill for me, even though it was late in his life and he didn't have the chops that he once had. But I got to meet one of my heroes, so it's always a great thing.
So I'm going to insert the song right here.
Okay. When the night has come, oh, and the land is dark, and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. I want you to stand by me. Why don't you stand by me? Come on and stand by me. And if the sky we look upon should tumble and fall, all the mountains should crumble to the sea, let me tell you, darling, I won't cry. I won't cry. I won't shed a tear. Just as long as you stand by me, pretty little darling, won't you stand by me? I want you to stand by me. Oh, darling, stand by me. I'll make you happy, I'll make you glad. I promise you now, baby, that you'll never be sad. If I told you once, I told you twice, right here and hold my hand, that would be so nice. I'll never hurt you, never desert you. Stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by you forevermore. Forevermore, I'm gonna stand by you.
All right, coming out of Stand By Me, you know, definitely like that take of the song, but I'm curious to know, we want to go, or I should say before I move forward, to go backward. The song is available Apple, Spotify, all that fun stuff that people get their music nowadays, because you said it tongue in cheek, but there's truth to it when you sent the track over to me, in that people don't buy records anymore or CDs or anything like that. So I guess my next question would be, since you've been involved with the music business from the 60s on in different avenues and facets and stuff, what has been the biggest surprise to you technology-wise as far as putting out your products?
Oh boy, I don't even know how to answer that, because I'm the opposite of a tech guy. You know, I like to record songs with all the musicians together in the same room, which nobody does anymore. My most recent album was called Timeless, and I had everybody in there, at least the rhythm section in there together, you know, and you get a certain feeling when everybody's playing off each other and inspiring each other at the same time, you know, rather than, you know, the bass player comes in 3 months later and adds his part. You know, I mean, there's something sterile about that to me that's missing in a lot of modern music. It doesn't seem to stop things from making millions of dollars, but but it's missing aesthetically, so I don't know, when things change, you kind of go with it. If things don't change necessarily for the better. Here's an example. Michael Kuskuna, the great jazz producer and one of my best friends, and I were asked to produce Lou Rawls in 1989, and when Blue Note Records signed him. And that was at the time when people were recording digitally. So Michael, who knows 1,000 times more about tech than I do, he said, there's a coldness to digital recording, and they haven't gotten it down yet. He said, but he had an idea. He said, let's record onto tape, but we'll record at twice the speed as normal. And that will retain the warmth, because Lou was a very warm singer. And the musicians we had, Richard T. and Cornell Dupree, and these wonderful musicians, were all warm players. And so when Michael switched it over to the digital domain for CDs, our record was warmer sounding than most digital records of that time. I think they've improved it, or maybe just my ears have gotten bad over the years. I don't know, but I think that was an adjustment that people had to make if they wanted to keep the warmth. And of course, where do people listen now? They listen on this,
Mm-hmm.
And so how much warmth are you going to hear on that?
This is true. But obviously, your band that you've been with for 20 years, 30 years at this point, the Beaters.
1979. Yeah.
And obviously, you've touched on a little bit about the feeling of that band and your influences. There's some jazz, there's this, there's that. There's definitely more sophistication, I would say, with you guys, but you still keep it rock and roll. How is that possible?
Well, being the age I am, I was born in 1944. So I was probably of the first generation of rock and roll fans. So
Chuck Berry and Little Richard, things like that.
Yeah, Fats Domino was the first record I ever bought. Blueberry Hill, I bought the same day I bought Honky Tonk. So that shows you where I started from. And then, of course, being a New York boy, we idolized Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, and Willie Winfield of the Harp Tones, and all of whom I later got to work with, and befriend. So that's rock and roll is in my heart. But my mother was a singer, and she was on the Perry Como Show and the Ray Charles singers on the Perry Como Show and on Como's records. So she had pretty, good taste. She'd bring home Frank Sinatra, songs for young lovers, songs for swinging lovers. She'd bring home Arthur Prysock. She'd bring home Nancy Wilson. She'd bring home Duke Ellington, Nat Cole. So I was hearing that music at the same time, and loved it just as much. Although when I wanted to be a singer, I saw Chuck Berry and I wanted to be him, and I saved up my little $35 lawn mowing money and went to Sears and bought a guitar. Plugged it into my mom's tape recorder because I didn't have enough money to buy an amp. And I went on from there,
Well, how would you say, because you mentioned there about growing up in the first generation of rock and roll, and it's funny, it reminded me, because I just recently watched the Elvis movie, because I've always been a big fan of Elvis from the time I was yay high, the one with Tom Hanks and stuff. And that generation of, like I said, of Chuck Berry and you lead the Fats Domino, Little Richard, and just on and on and on. Parents were used to big band and, a different type of music. And I think you come from a different element because your dad was a announcer for NBC. You just mentioned mom's history working with Perry Como and such. But how were your parents with some of these early musical influences for you? Because it was a mixture, obviously. It wasn't just rock and roll. It wasn't just this. It wasn't big band. There was definitely a mixture with what you had.
Well, in top 40 radio at the time, I was growing up, there was it wasn't narrowcast like it is today, it's down to the point where you have a Sinatra channel on Sirius, what I mean? So, but then, you one minute you're listening to the Coasters, the next minute you're listening to Percy Faith's theme from Summer Place. It's if you didn't like it, you pressed the button in your parents' car and you went to the next station. But, we were exposed to a wide variety of music then, and I think it was healthier in the sense that that being exposed to a wider variety of music, it gave you choices of where you wanted to go, what you liked best, and what your direction would become. When my mother brought home Duke Ellington's Uptown album, and that version from 1951 of Duke doing Take the A Train with Betty Roche's bebop vocal and that crazy saxophone solo by Paul Gonsalves, just blew my brains out, man. I listened to it. And, the irony is that my youngest child, my son, Charlie, who's now 34, he picked me up in his car the other day, and on his thing that he plays music on was that record. And he starts singing along with the horn parts, of Duke Ellington. And I said, boy, to myself, I raised him right,
If anything, I did something right when my kid has good musical choices.
You bet.
And before we get at this moment and all, and we talk doo-wop and stuff, back in the day, you served as a conductor for a bunch of acts, Ronnie Spector and Shirelles and stuff. But probably one of my favorites that I had read that you were involved with was a 72 reunion of Dion and the Belmonts, who were probably one of my favorite groups of that style of music. So what was it like working with Dion and the Belmonts?
Well, these fellows did a documentary on me called Harlem to Hollywood, named after my memoir of the same title. And we went to Dion and asked him if he'd speak a few words. Actually, I asked him to speak a few words for the back flap of my book. And by the time he got around to it, the book was already off to the publisher. But we used what he wrote, which was beautiful. We used it at the beginning of the movie. And in it, Dion says, and this is a paraphrase of what he said, not an exact quote, but he said, when I first started doing well with Runaround Sue and The Wanderer, he said, I bought a house for my parents up in White Plains, New York. And my sisters used to go to this nightclub, the 1220 Club, to see this guy, Billy Vera. And they came home, they said, Dee, you got to hear this guy, Billy Vera. He's the real thing, man. So I go, yeah. And then one Saturday night I went down and I saw Billy Vera. And indeed, he was and is the real thing. And we've been friends ever since. So I had played with Dion. on some shows. And when Richard Nader asked him and asked the Belmonts separately if they would consent to do a show together, a comeback show, they said, yeah, we'll do it, but we don't like your band. We'll do it only if you hire Billy Vera and his band to back us up. So that's how that happened. Now, I will never forget that night when Richard Nader announced, I asked Dion, I asked the Belmonts, they said yes. Boom. Well, the audience reaction, because Dion DiMucci he's Sinatra in New York to that generation. People idolize him, and rightly so. I never heard such an ovation in my entire life. People were stomping their feet before they sang a note. It was scary because I thought the floor was going to fall in, in Madison Square Garden. It was, and you know what? The album is still in print after all these years.
Amazing. And the other thing, and this will lead into At This Moment and such, but I was watching some old interviews you did because I am 38, and I'm old enough to remember the end of Johnny Carson and into Jay Leno for The Tonight Show. But I had seen some stuff you did on Johnny, and two things that stood out from that is I had heard it was told to you through social media and such that you were Johnny's favorite singer behind Tony Bennett, which is another one, rightfully so, he's up there.
Yeah.
And you also told a story on one of the interviews, being that your mom would call radio stations and try to promote, hey, can you play this song? Can you play this record? Yada, yada, yada. So
down in Florida.
Obviously, The Tonight Show has always had a staple on NBC and such. What was it like for you to be a reoccurring guest on there?
Well, it was an honor. You see, my agent, Danny Robinson, who, by the way, is retiring. I can't even believe that. He's younger than me. His father, Bud Robinson, managed Doc Severinsen for 20 years. So Danny was sort of hooked into The Tonight Show. So the first time that they had me on there, the record was starting to go up the charts. And I don't know whether it was Danny, whether it was his father, I don't know, but they got me on the show. They didn't want to pay for the beaters. So I sang the song with Doc's band, and it went over well. And this was before it hit number one. And
would this have been during the initial run when it was only in the 70s, or closer to when it hit number one?
It hit number one in January of 87.
Okay.
So the first time I was on the show would have had to have been probably December 86.
Okay.
Because we did their New Year's Eve show with the Beaters. And that was New Year's Eve going into 87. And that was very cool, because that night we had a gig. We taped the show in the afternoon, brought in the new year on tape. And that night we had a gig at our usual club, our club called At My Place. And the owner was a great guy. What he did was he rented a huge TV so that our fans could see us on Carson at midnight on television. And it was a wonderful, wonderful moment, and about 3 weeks later, because it was my mother's birthday, January 24th, that the record reached number one on the Billboard and Cashbox charts. And as you said, my mother, as the record was starting to get played, she had terminal cancer at the time. But she was shameless. She'd call up these awful, morning disc jockeys who are just a bunch of wise guys. And she understood that they were making fun of this old lady, trying to get her son's record played. But she went along with it like a trooper, like the trooper that she was. And you know what, you couldn't stop that record. It was one of those things that it appealed to across the board, every demographic group you can imagine, young, old, white, black, country, rhythm and blues, pop. We had 65-year-old couples making it their song. We had junior high school kids making it their prom song. It just, for some reason, it struck a nerve in just about everyone that had any kind of a heart in them.
And it's funny, and again, this might shock people that I mention this as we start to talk about the song, but it has this feel to it for me. And this might show my either useless amount of music knowledge or however people want to take it. But it has this feel of, like, say, Bob Wills, where it has a little bit of steel with the horns, a little bit of Texas swing music, a mix of jazz. Just there's a lot of different elements. The great sax solo. There's a lot of elements there.
You nailed it. You nailed it, brother.
Thank you, sir.
Because I had been listening to a lot of Bob Wills at the time we started the Beaters.
There you go. So
it was Bob Wills meets Ray Charles, basically.
Yeah, I had no idea that you were listening to him at the time, but that's the feeling I got with that. Also, a little Hank Williams because of that Texas swing and stuff, but that's here and there. But how was it for you that initially hit the charts at 79 and 81 and credit it to you and the Beaters, but then a couple of years later, the producer from Family Ties says, hey, we like the song when he saw it live, and we'd like to use this in our TV show, which was hot at the time.
It was the number 2 show in the country after Cosby at that time. Well, yeah, I mean, what had happened was we had been on a record company called Alpha Records out of Japan, which had a Los Angeles office. And we were the first act on the label, so we got the big push. They sent us to Tokyo. We won the gold prize over there, singing at this moment, by the way. And the first record out, they like to put out a up-tempo song first. So we had a chart record called I Can Take Care of Myself. Went into the top 30s. And then, but they really believed in At This Moment, so they put that out second. But the head of promotion got into a fight with the boss of the company and quit. So there was nobody to promote the record. And shortly after that, the Japanese pulled the plug on the American version of the label, and we were without a record deal. Well, by that time, I was, 36 years old and too old to be considered a rock and roll star. So it was difficult to get another record company interested, and nobody was. So I began to eke out a living as an actor, playing Thug of the Week or whatever. And that came about through my original songwriting mentor was a fellow named Chip Taylor, who wrote Wild Thing, Angel of Maury, another Westchester boy. And we wrote my early 60s hits, Storybook Children and things like that together. And then when I first came to California, we were playing at the famous Troubadour every Monday night at midnight. And one night, Chip's brother, John Voight, came in with his acting coach, David Proval, who you'll remember from The Sopranos and from Mean Streets. And John came backstage, and because I'd known him from the 60s, with Chip. He said, Billy, he said, I haven't seen you on stage in years. He said, but he said, you're doing something up there, man, that I've never seen a singer do. I said, what's that, John? John can be very intense. And he said, most singers get up there and they sing at an audience, hello, LA, great to see you, all that jive. He said, you don't do that. He said, you come from a very organic, very honest place. And you're working from the inside out rather than working from the outside. That's actor talk. I didn't know what he was talking about pretty much. He said, you need to come to David's class. He said, you could be a great actor. I said, oh, John, I'm not good looking enough to be an actor, number one. I said, and I have no interest in acting. But he said, do me a favor, come to the class. So I went, and as it turned out, the first night I was there were these two fellows on stage, one named Chris Mulkey and another named Rocky Echeverria, who became Stephen Bauer, who, if you watch Ray Donovan, he and John are on Ray Donovan. Rocky / Steve plays the Israeli guy who's Ray Donovan's right-hand man. Anyway, I said, these guys are doing something real. I said, acting is not, BS like I thought it was. It can be an art form in itself. So I stayed. I was still too frightened to get up on stage and try anything because I didn't know what they were doing. But little by little, I got it, or I began to get it. And after a year or two, people started asking me to be in plays and then be on, play cop number 3 or something on a TV show. And then I started doing movies and stuff. And so I could barely make a living during those slow years, those 5 years between when At This Moment first came out and when I got the golden phone call from Family Ties. And, I was able to apply that also to my singing work because way back, even in New York, it had occurred to me at one point that, there's got to be more to it than just, hey, everybody, let's dance, whatever. And I said, what if I'm singing a comical song, like a Coasters song, Charlie Brown or Yakety Yak or something, and my best friend dies this afternoon. As an artist, what's my obligation? My obligation, of course, is to be funny because it's a funny song. That's what the words tell you, the lyrics of the song tell you. But do I ignore my tragedy? And if I have an obligation to acknowledge that, how do I do that and still be funny? And would the crashing together of those two things in an interior way create something larger and more important than just going through the comedy routine? Which, by the way, I got all my comic timing from the Coasters. I played with them dozens of times, and they were really good friends of mine. And I watched every move they made, And so I was working on that already, but then going to David's class gave me the tools to know how to do that. Because if you're handed a script, you have an obligation to that script, to be that character, whether I'm playing a school teacher or an axe murderer, I got to be that guy. And I got to feel what that guy feels. And it's the same with a song. people say, well, how can you sing at this moment 5,000 times over the last 30 years, 40 years and still keep it real? Well, that's how you do it. For the first few years, I can go back to the girl that was the inspiration for the song, but that dries up after a while. So you've got to find something new to put you in that same place, because that's what your obligation really is, to connect with your audience and to make them feel what the song is supposed to feel. And then if you want to really take that up to the next step of performance art, to make them feel who you are, not just what you're feeling in that particular piece of material. I mean, I hope this isn't too inside baseball for your audience.
No, you're fine. They tend to like that.
Oh, good. Well, you must have a very hip audience.
But the one thing, as you were answering that, flashed in my head when you were talking about when you were having your conversations with John Voight and all. And the thing that was flashing in my head, that as you were saying that, was something you said in the beginning of this conversation. And when we were talking about Stand By Me and singing from your soul, if that makes sense, and trying to express. Yeah, that was the thing that flashed in my head when you were saying it. It's like, it brings everything full circle for me.
To simplify, sing it like you mean it. Stand up there, and whether it's acting or singing, say it, sing it like you mean it, like your life depends on it.
There was a quote by the late great Glenn Frey from the Eagles, who I'm a huge fan of the Eagles. Glad I got to see him twice and such. But he said about that, because you said about singing the song so many times over the years and such, he goes, I have to remember, there might be times that I'm annoyed that I have to do Hotel California, do this, do that, whatever the case is. But I have to remember that there are probably people in that audience that came to see us perform these songs, or in your case, at this moment. And I have to put the same effort into tonight as I've done the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. Because our fan base, for whatever records, whether it's our stuff from the 60s, in your case, 70s, at this moment, whatever the case is, they have a certain expectation. So, and I thought that hit on pretty good.
Well, it's the same thing that Jackie Wilson told me. Jackie was a friend of mine. I played with him. My first wife's sister was his girlfriend for a while. So we were pretty close. And the first time I played the Apollo Theater in 1968, he came to visit backstage. And he said, and he gave me a great piece of advice. He said, always do your hit, no matter how tired you get of it. He said, because that's the only reason they're paying their little $2 to come and see you. That's the only reason, and it's true. I mean, the great Lester Young, saxophone player, who was the most inventive of saxophone players of his era. He could play a song 8,000 different ways, and be creative. But once he had a hit with a certain song, like Jumping with Symphony Sid or whatever, they wanted to hear that solo. And I'm sure it annoyed a creative guy like him, but he knew he had to do it. He's a professional. You must remember, you are a professional. All this highfalutin talk about art, it means nothing if you're not a professional.
And like you said, like Jackie told you, people are coming to spend their money to see a certain thing, whether it's a musician, a movie, a whatever it is. That fan base is coming to spend their money to see and have certain expectations.
Yeah.
And I want to wrap here because I just heard this morning and from another interview you did. And I thought it was great because you mentioned him earlier, but you got a good secondhand story of a guy who lived or was initially from between us, because I'm in Philly, you're a New York guy, Frank Sinatra, a Newark, New Jersey guy. There was a good story you heard that he told somebody about at this moment, or seeing a video version on VHS at the time. Would you mind repeating that story?
Sure. I guess it was around 1987, maybe 88, because the record was still fairly hot, so it had to be 87. I was asked to do a show at the beautiful Wiltern Theater, which is this just gorgeous, gorgeous Art Deco building on the corner of Wilshire Boulevard. Beautiful old theater. And it was a salute to songwriters. So there was, oh my goodness, I can't remember who, Chris Christopherson, a lot of great songwriters, each singing a song. And so I was asked to sing at this moment, and had to use a house band. And so I had a rehearsal with them. Boom, everything was fine. And come the moment of the show, the conductor counted at this moment off too slow. And I had to make a split second decision. Do I stop him and count it off at the correct tempo? Or do I go with this slower tempo and see where it takes me emotionally? Because, sometimes magic can come from those little surprises. And so in that split second, I chose to do that. And the result was, it did take me to a real Billie Holiday place emotionally, and it resulted in this standing ovation. People went nuts. So unbeknownst to me, the show was being taped. So about 20 years later, on Facebook, this woman hits me up, or as they say, friends me. And she said, I used to be one of Frank Sinatra's girlfriends, or his girlfriend, she put it. And she said, one night when he came over to see me, I played him the tape of you singing your song, and he made me play it again and again and again and again, 5 times. And he said, who is this kid? He said, why isn't he the biggest star in the world? This is one of the greatest vocal performances, stage performances I've ever seen in my life. Why is he not a star? This kid. And she said, ever after that, every time he came to visit her, he made her play the tape. And I was like, whoa, why didn't I get to hear him say that to me? So I could have met him maybe, because he was God as a singer, because listening to songs for swinging lovers and songs for young lovers as a kid, I used to sing along with those albums back in my little room back there. And I guess what I got from him, obviously I was singing rock and roll and doo-wop and whatever, but, you get something from the greats without trying to copy them. If you're an amateur, you'll try to copy that person. And if you're professional, I keep bringing that word up, you will try to find something that you relate to in that person and use that. And in his case, it was, and I'm not even sure I knew it, would be the phrasing, his phrasing. So everybody always talked about Sinatra's phrasing. Well, after I had my first couple of hits with Judy Clay on Atlantic Records in 1968, Atlantic Records gave me a solo session. And Jerry Wexler, the boss there, found a song for me called With Pen in Hand, which I did not write. And it was a great song. And so I'm in the studio, and my manager was dear friends with Jilly Rizzo, who was Sinatra's best friend and owner of a place called Jilly's in Midtown Manhattan. And Jilly said, he said, Jesus, who's this kid? He said, he says, he's the closest, when it comes to phrasing, only Frank can outphrase this kid. So I got to meet Jilly and befriend him somewhat. So 20 years later, when At This Moment was out, now I get a gig to play in Palm Springs. By that time, both Sinatra and Jilly were living in Palm Springs. So I'm in my dressing room, and there's a knock at the door, and then this guy is like one of those crooked nose guys. Hey, he's standing in the doorway with like a couple of dozen roses in his arm. This big tough guy. He says, "Hey," he said, "Jilly says to tell you that he's homesick in bed and he can't come to see you sing, but he said to tell you he still loves you, and Frank's the only one that can out-sing you." You know? And I'm like, I thank you, sir. You know, Mr. Gangster, whatever your name is, you know. And,
allegedly. Allegedly.
Yeah. And it was allegedly, yeah. No, yeah. I mean, who knows if he was a gangster, but he was one of those kind of guys that Sinatra liked to surround himself with, you know. So apparently, I for a while I dreamed about, man, if only Frank had sung At This Moment. Then I realized, I said, I don't think he would have sung it, because he was a stickler for grammar. Mm-hmm. And there's a line in there, "'cause you just don't love me no more." And of course, there's no way it would lose the whole meaning if you said, "because you just don't love me anymore," which is correct grammar, you know. And I don't even think Frank could have made that work, you know.
Yeah. And it just seems with the tone of singing it and all, it would change the dynamic. You know?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I mean, he had great taste in the Great American Songbook, but he still sometimes, he wasn't perfect.
Who is?
As Bad Leroy Brown is a great example. Or what was the other one? Everybody's Twisting. You remember when Frank did that one?
Oh, boy.
It wasn't perfect. Even the gods aren't perfect, you know?
No. Well, I'm going to have links for Stand By Me and your website and all that stuff.
Great.
Sir, yes. I appreciate the time. Happy New Year. I know we're a week in or so. I appreciate the conversation with you. There's so much more I could talk to you about, but we'll have to figure that out at some point. Billy Vera, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And you're a very good interviewer. I'm always grateful when I come across somebody like you.
Appreciate it.
What did you think I would do at this moment when you're standing before me with tears in your eyes, trying to tell me that you have found you another? You just don't love me no more.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies, enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
Hey you guys, this is Allie Pauline, and you are listening to Crazy Train Radio.